Ice Cube's Big Three is back for Season 2. The Big Three is a professional 3-on-3 basketball league that features former NBA stars like Amari Stoudemire, Nate Robinson, Chauncey Billups, Baron Davis, Carlos Boozer, Mike Bibby, Meta World Peace, and many, many more. Get your tickets at big3.com/tickets or tune in live every Friday night on Fox or FS1. That's right, this year the games are on live. Big Three, we're changing the game. Welcome to another episode of the HoopsHype Podcast. My name is Alex Kennedy, and joining me today to break down the big news, the Kawhi Leonard trade, is my HoopsHype colleague, Frank Urbina. Frank, how you doing, man?
Doing great. A little bit sleepy after Kawhi woke us up, but I'm doing good. How about yourself?
Yeah, that was crazy. Okay, so let's start with that because this is a crazy situation all around. We're obviously going to get to the trade. Kawhi Leonard and Danny Green were traded from the Spurs to the Toronto Raptors for DeMar DeRozan, Jakob Poeltl, and a protected 2019 first-round pick. The pick is protected 1 through 20, and if the Spurs don't get that pick in 2019 due to those protections, then they will get 2 second-round picks. But yeah, I mean, the way this all unfolded last night at, I believe, 3:20 a.m., we had a tweet from Shams come out and say, this is happening, or not that this is happening, but the Raptors and Spurs are engaged in serious talks for Kawhi Leonard. Woj shortly after followed up and said, these are serious talks. Then it became clear that this was at the goal line and almost done. You had DeMar DeRozan posting on Instagram saying, I think he deleted all of his pictures and posts, and then he put something on his IG story, basically saying, can't trust anyone, they tell you one thing, do another, don't disrupt me, don't talk to me. Like, he was not in a good mood at all. Then you have the report from Chris Haynes coming out right after all this stuff's going down, saying Kawhi Leonard has no desire to play in Toronto. So last night I was actually up already. I was writing something, and I had been up all night long. So this is all happening at 3, 4, 5 a.m. Eastern time, and it was crazy. Like I was about to go to sleep at one point, and I'm like, I can't look away from this. This is so entertaining. How did you find out? Because I had hit you on Slack last night just to see if you were also up. But obviously you were sleeping like a normal human being. How did you find out about all this?
I woke up as writers, we kind of have weird sleep schedules. So sometimes there's a chance on a different night I might have been up that late finishing up an article or something. Right. Because Shams' first tweet did come at 3:45 in the morning, which is usually my absolute limit for staying up, even if I'm working on something. But regardless, I was asleep last night. I went to sleep at a reasonable hour. I woke up at 8:30. I checked my phone, and like any good NBA journalist right now, I have my push notifications on for Adrian Wojnarowski and for Shams Charania and for Chris Haynes, actually. So I look at my phone, I'm like, there's no way this trade happened at 4 a.m. I was totally confused. I was a little bit pissed at Pop because, if it happened at noon, imagine all the clicks we would have gotten. And instead, we lost a lot of those things to their selfishness and making their move in the middle of the night. No, but seriously, it was just confusing. I woke up and I wasn't sure because the trade hadn't been agreed upon yet. But from what I read, I thought it had been. It was totally confusing and disorienting, kind of exciting. It kind of woke me up. I didn't need any morning coffee. So thanks for that, Kawhi, at least.
Yeah, it came in as a surprise. But we knew that the Raptors and the Spurs had been talking a little bit. I remember we had written an article whenever the Kawhi stuff first dropped that the Raptors could show interest, but it was always really minor. There wasn't a lot of talk about this. If he had landed in Boston or Philly or LA, obviously, it would have been, oh, okay, it finally happened or something like that. But with the Raptors, it kind of came out of left field, and even though they had been making it clear that no one on the roster was untouchable, there had been some DeMar DeRozan discussions for other players, they had definitely been kicking the tires on a few different trades, so it wasn't a huge surprise once it all came together, and it did make sense, but it was a surprise initially, and the timing was so shocking. That was interesting. I do want to say, I agree with you about the push notifications. You have to have on push notifications for, I would say, Adrian Wojnarowski, Shams Charania, Chris Haynes, Sam Amick, Brian Windhorst, go down the list. Mark Stein, I have push notifications for everyone because these guys all do a fantastic job, breaking news, and their analysis is great as well. Like if something happens, I want to know what they're thinking about it. So
well, and also they're all business, so they're not going to fill your timeline or fill your phone with annoying push notifications of them pushing other stuff. It's literally all NBA talk, which is great.
Oh, and I tell people all the time, never put my push notifications on. Someone told me one time, they were like, man, I constantly get, push notifications and it's a retweet of your article or like a joke or something like that. I'm like, oh man, my account is not for push notifications. I am so sorry you had to deal with that, because I am definitely not all business, all serious on Twitter. So I'm the last person you want to have push notifications for. But those guys, it makes things so much easier because you do get this news immediately. It sounds like we're doing like an ad for push notifications right now, but
yeah, let's move on from that.
But no, seriously, it is so much better, and you do get this stuff immediately, and you can wake up to 5 different reporters giving you every single angle of this trade. So yeah, I mean, I think those things are amazing, and it definitely helps you follow what's going on. Now, let's break down this move from all angles. Let's start with the Raptors. So they bring in Kawhi Leonard and Danny Green. Kawhi is obviously on a 1-year deal. Danny Green is also on an expiring contract. So the move here for them, I think, is let's see if we can contend in the Eastern Conference for 1 year. They have a starting lineup of Kyle Lowry, Danny Green, Kawhi Leonard, Serge Ibaka, Jonas Valanciunas, and then off their bench they have OG Anunoby, Fred VanVleet, who they just re-signed, CJ Miles, DeLon Wright. They have a number of guys off that bench too that, it was one of the best benches in the NBA last year. So they look at this team and I think they think, okay, let's try to contend this year. The East is wide open. Let's take our shot. Maybe we can beat the Boston Celtics or the Philadelphia 76ers. And then if it doesn't work out, we've already heard that Kawhi has no desire to play in Toronto apparently. Danny Green on a 1-year deal. If it doesn't work out, then they clear a ton of cap room. And we had done a podcast whenever the Raptors season was coming to an end, talking about how they were in such a bad cap situation. They had no flexibility at all. Really, the only way for them to improve their roster was to make a trade because everyone, was under these long contracts and they didn't really have any money at all to kind of make a big move and improve. And I think Masai Ujiri recognized that. And if you remember, whenever Masai took over the Toronto job, he wanted to rebuild right away. I mean, he wanted to blow that team up, and there was talk about them, tanking possibly to go after Andrew Wiggins at the time because he was a Canadian, and there were all these different things going. Kyle Lowry was almost traded to the New York Knicks, among other teams. There was talks about DeMar DeRozan getting traded back then. I think Masai, for a long time, has wanted to kind of rebuild and put his fingerprints on this roster rather than go... And he has done that, don't get me wrong. He definitely has made some great moves and helped build his team, but there are a lot of players on this roster that he inherited. So I think the goal for him was, let's see if we can convince Kawhi to stay. Toronto is a beautiful place. I just talked to Fred VanVleet a few days ago, and we ran a Q&A with him, and he said, I'd never been here. I'd never been out of the country at all, but I love Toronto now. I love it here. I want to live here forever. I want to raise kids here. It's amazing. He actually, the way he described it, he said it's like a big, beautiful American city without all the bullshit. That's the way he described it. So, I mean, like, guys do go to Toronto and love it, and, they're happy there. So, I mean, maybe they're thinking they can persuade him to stay beyond this one season, but if not, they have, a light at the end of the tunnel in terms of their cap situation. DeMar DeRozan was owed $85 million over the next 3 years. So if Green and Leonard leave after the season, then they get out of that money. And Bobby Marks from ESPN, who does a great job breaking down salary cap situations, pointed out by the 2020 season, they'd only have $15 million on their payroll. The only guys that they'd have under contract are Norm Powell and OG Anunoby. So, I mean, there definitely was, I think, a sense of let's try to go for the home run and see if we can make an NBA Finals run. But there's also this, thing in the back of their mind where it's, okay, if Kawhi leaves, it's not the end of the world. Like some of these organizations that we're talking about trading for Kawhi Leonard, if he leaves in a year, that GM gets fired and it's a disaster and there's no real plan. Masai Ujiri knows what he's doing, and I think if Kawhi leaves, he has that plan B ready to go.
Yeah, basically, if Kawhi leaves, they're just going to shift right into a rebuild, which is fine. They basically shed DeMar DeRozan's contract, which, I mean, he's a great player, he's an all-star, but it's still a lot of money to owe a guy whose game doesn't adapt that well to the modern NBA because he doesn't shoot that many threes. He loves to pull up mid-range jumpers. And then they're also going to lose Danny Green, who is still a valuable piece. I mean, he's right around, even though he's fallen off the last few years as a three-point shooter, he's still right around league average. Still plays pretty good defense. He's not the lockdown guy he once was, which I think people are not realizing here. But you would lose those two guys, which would be, I mean, it'd be a big loss. But still, I mean, it's better than paying the luxury tax and being stuck in a mediocre hell, which is like a lot of other teams are suffering through. For example, like the Miami Heat, just to name one. So yeah, they would get out from a bad contract. They wouldn't have cap room yet next season, but they would have some the year after that. I think it was a coup by Masai Ujiri to land Kawhi and not have to give up. First of all, he's probably going to lose that first rounder if they win depending on how many games they win. I think they're going to lose the first rounder, but the top 20 protected just in case disaster happens is amazing. They also didn't lose OG Anunoby, Pascal Siakam, or Delon Wright, who are their best three bench guys besides Fred VanVleet. They had arguably the best bench in the league last season, so it's good that they're going to keep that intact. Jakob Poeltl's a decent loss. I mean, I think he's a good player. I think he might be a little bit underrated, but he does like to chase blocks instead of playing good defense sometimes. But he's still young. I think that was a good pickup by the Spurs. Overall, I love what the Raptors did. Their core wasn't getting any younger as it was presently construed. I don't think they would have had a chance against the Celtics or the Sixers in a series, just because I think those teams are more talented. But I mean, if you're landing Kawhi, obviously we have to say it depends on if he's healthy or not. But if he's healthy, he's back to his top 5 player form. I mean, you're landing an elite MVP caliber player to play with Kyle Lowry, to defend on the perimeter with OG Anunoby, which is going to be amazing. I am still a little bit concerned about Serge Ibaka just because I hate the fit with him on the team. I like their lineups better when they have Pascal Siakam in there because he can run the floor a little bit better. Ibaka might be a better three-point shooter, but I mean, let's be honest, Ibaka hasn't been as impactful as he was in his prime for a few seasons now. So I don't like his fit. Danny Green might be a little bit overrated. People still think he's the Danny Green from a few years ago from when the Spurs were in the finals, those back-to-back years, and he's not, especially because his three-point percentage has plummeted a little bit. But regardless, I mean, you're landing a top 5 player. You have another almost borderline All-NBA caliber player in Kyle Lowry at running point. Danny Green at the 2 is solid. I like the pickup. I think it was a great move for the Raptors, and it's a worthwhile risk. And if it blows up, they can rebuild starting next season, which is also great.
Yeah, because they already have, the young talent in place to start that rebuild. But yeah, I think you bring up a good point. They could have given up a lot more or had to give up a lot more to be able to pull off this trade and only give up DeRozan and Poeltl. I think that's really impressive. And that pick too. I mean, I don't think that pick is worth a ton. Maybe that's just me, but it's going to be a late first round pick, and I understand there's some value there, but it's not like that's a pick that you're dying to give up or really want to keep. There would be no value with that pick if it was a team like the Kings or something. No offense to Kings fans, but if it was like the Kings drafting, that would be no value. But for teams like, to be fair, like the Lakers who landed a few good pieces with the late 20s picks, or the Spurs who got DeJounte Murray around there, it could have some value. But still, it's top 20 protected, so you're protecting for disaster. I think it's amazing he was able to land Kawhi with a top 20 protected first round pick. Yeah, and that's why there's a lot of teams that don't want to trade with Masai Ujiri, because he kind of has this reputation for being able to win these trades and win them convincingly. But I do think we're going to talk about the Spurs side of this in a second. I don't think this is a blowout win for Masai. I think it's a good deal for both sides. I have some questions about the Spurs, but my main thing with the Spurs is I think there really wasn't much else out there, so that's kind of where it's hard to say, did they make the right move? Did they pick the right deal? Because it seemed like there were so many players that they were trying to get or pursuing that weren't available to them. So let's stay on the Raptors for one more second here, and then we'll get over to the Spurs. So do you think Kawhi could be convinced to stay there? Do you think we already have, immediately after the rumors start, he says he has no desire to play in Toronto. He's been adamant that he wants to be, in Los Angeles. Do you think he leaves after 1 year?
Probably. I mean, just judging by the package that the Spurs got in return, that package kind of screams. It's kind of like a red light saying, "Oh, this is only a 1 year rental." Because if they had some sort of guarantee or the notion that maybe Kawhi would be willing to resign after this season, then I think it would have cost them an OG Anunoby or maybe a Siakam or a DeLon Wright or something. But since they didn't, and it ended up being Jakob Poeltl and a 29-year-old making $85 million over the next 3 seasons and a protected first-round pick, that kind of tells you that even the Raptors believe this is going to be a 1 year rental.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I never want to say never, just because, I mean, I don't think anyone saw Paul George staying with the way he was so focused on the Lakers. But, the situation, I think if you look at the Raptors, Kawhi's going to think, this is a good team, but I want to be part of a great team. I want to win championships. I want to be in LA, my hometown. Like, I can see him wanting to walk away from the situation.
Well, also once the Paul George trade went through, the first thing out of another reliable reporter like Chris Hayes's mouth wasn't, Paul George does not want to go to Oklahoma City,
Right.
Which, I mean, I'm all for players deciding their fate and doing what they want to do, but at the same time, Kawhi just spent the last season kind of treating one of the classiest organizations in the NBA or in all pro sports, treating them like garbage. So, I don't know, maybe shut your mouth at least until the season starts before you start leaking that you don't want to go there. I just think it's kind of screwed up.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. You're right. With the Paul George stuff, it was, he's hell-bent on going to the Lakers. Then the Thunder trade happened, and, he basically said all the right things at the press conference and was respectful. So, for Kawhi, or if it wasn't Kawhi, someone in his camp to leak that, I could see why, Raptors fans immediately would be upset, and it definitely, starts the relationship off on a sour note. That's not something that I'm sure the Raptors were happy about, because they knew it could be a rental, but to say he has no desire to be there, that's pretty harsh. Now, one thing that did upset me, and I think a lot of people are overlooking this a little bit, DeMar DeRozan apparently was sat down a few days ago while at Las Vegas Summer League showing support for the Raptors' younger players, and they told him they're not going to trade him. The front office sat down DeMar, said, "Look, we're not going to trade you." They gave him that assurance, and that's important to a player. I just wrote an article talking about players giving, their free agency horror stories or trade horror stories, and a number of players said, a team will tell you one thing, then do something completely different. Or one situation that was described was a guy that was told he was not going to be traded, so he was really emotional. He called his kids, told them, "We're staying. You don't have to change schools again." The kids were so happy. 2 hours later, he gets traded. Like, things like this in the NBA. I know the NBA is a business. I know this kind of stuff happens, but apparently these talks have been going on for 2 weeks. That's what Woj and everyone is reporting now, that the Spurs and the Raptors have been discussing the framework of this deal, these talks, for 2 weeks now, which means if you sat down DeMar DeRozan 3 or 4 days ago and said, "We're not going to trade you," they did that knowing, very well that he could be dealt any second. As soon as this deal was going to be consummated. So that really frustrates me. I hate when teams do that. And the reason they do it is because if DeMar didn't get traded, then they want him to show up for training camp and be happy and think, "Oh, this organization has my back and they didn't even want to trade me." Those rumors weren't real. So teams do it to protect themselves, because if the guy does end up coming back, they don't want him to be upset because he was involved in trade talks. That's why initially I was so interested last night whenever that Kawhi Leonard thing came out saying he had no desire to be in Toronto. I'm thinking, could this deal fall apart? Because, does that change how the Raptors view this? Are they worried that Kawhi, wouldn't report or whatever? And then do they have to go back to DeMar and try to fix this relationship, which I can't see that happening. Obviously, that didn't happen. It wasn't a Lamar Odom Lakers type situation, but that crossed my mind. That's the kind of stuff that can happen when you screw over a player like this, where you sit down a guy that has been so important to your franchise and a guy that you drafted, developed, became a star for your city, was great in the community. Fred VanVleet gave me an amazing quote 2 days ago talking about how DeMar, he owes his NBA career so far to DeMar and Kyle Lowry, how they went above and beyond taking him under their wing, how they were amazing to him on and off the court. They were great teammates, but also great friends. He's like, they didn't have to do that. They didn't have to go out of their way to help me, but they did. He's like, I was an undrafted guy that, came in. I made the team basically from playing well in summer league and then fighting for a roster spot in training camp, and they treated me like a brother, and he really appreciated that. So this is a guy that was really important to his teammates, to the community, and you sit him down a few days ago, tell him you're not going to move him, and then you trade him. I don't like when teams do that. It really frustrates me. I know this is a business, but I think there's a way to go about it without, getting a guy's hopes up, because he obviously wanted to stay there. He wanted to be in Toronto. He signed a long-term deal. He was excited about this next season. You can have these trade talks without sitting a guy down and telling him we're not going to move you, and then basically stab him in the back and move him a few days later. I know why the teams do it. It's because they don't want the guy to be upset, and if a trade doesn't happen, you don't want it to be awkward, but I just hate when teams do that kind of stuff.
Yeah, no, I totally get what your point is, and I noticed a lot of players were pissed off this morning, like players not even involved with the situation. Like Lou Williams was tweeting that he was heartbroken about how they did DeMar, since he's the face of the franchise and he loved the city, he treated the city so well. So from that perspective, I get it. I think DeMar DeRozan is a super classy dude. I loved what he did when he spoke out about his battles with depression. At the same time, Kevin Love was talking about his panic attacks. So yeah, let me just preface my answer by saying that he's a great guy and it is messed up, and I totally get it, and it could end up biting them in the ass eventually. But at the same time, I kind of understand why Masai Ujiri did it, because like you said, it is a business first and foremost, and second of all, I don't know, if DeMar DeRozan had found out like yesterday or the day before that there was a strong chance he was going to get traded, that would be risking that he would have like a freak out on social media or go to or leak stuff saying, oh, I'm going to get traded and I don't want to. They shouldn't treat me like this. This is garbage. And once that happens, you're very much risking the deal falling apart. And obviously, that's the last thing Masai Ujiri wanted, considering he's landing an elite player in return. So I do understand both perspectives. I think it is messed up, and I think it could end up biting them in the ass. And DeMar's a great guy, but at the same time, I understand why he did it. Like Masai he was basically at the 1 yard line, and he couldn't risk DeMar hearing about it or like thinking it was going to be true that he was going to be traded, and then having some sort of meltdown that would cause the deal to fall through. So I get it for both sides.
Well, see, I just think you don't tell him anything then. You don't have to sit him down and say, we are going to look to trade you, or, it's going to happen, or we're in serious talks right now. You could say nothing, and then, it's going to catch him by surprise and he's going to be upset. But I think, not knowing anything and being in the dark and wondering, am I going to be traded? That definitely is, concerning, and it's uncomfortable. But I think it's even worse to have someone tell you, we're not trading you, don't worry, you're going to be back, and then it happens, 2 days later, 3 days later, whatever it was. I see what you're saying. If they had told him he was going to be moved, then he may freak out and, start leaking stuff and all this. But, they didn't have to tell him that either. They could have just said nothing. And, players deal with rumors all the time. They hear them. So, maybe he's wondering, am I going to get traded? But they could have said nothing. And then, he finds out about the deal like many players do when they get dealt, versus having, this reaction where he feels betrayed. But this is why players have trust issues. This is why players get upset whenever they make a free agency decision and they're despised. But then they point to the teams and say, whenever, we get lied to and get traded, or, we get hurt and then all of a sudden we're useless and we're cut and teams don't care about us anymore. Fans aren't going nuts over those things. This is how players think. I'm just telling you this right now. Players are looking at this right now and saying, you guys wonder why we make the moves we do in free agency and, take our career and control our career and make these moves. And, when they make a business decision, they get hated, jerseys are burned, and they're the enemy. But when a team does something like this that is arguably just as bad, if not worse, this would be like if a free agent went to a general manager, and said, look, I'm not going to leave you. I love playing for you guys. I want to be here. I'm not going anywhere. And then 2 days later leaving. Like,
Could you imagine the vitriol that he would face from fans if that actually happened? That
exactly.
would be like it's so hypocritical from fans when they do that. So I totally got your point for sure.
And that's how players think right now. That's why they're looking at this and they're upset. DeMar's upset. It's just one of those things that I understand why fans don't get frustrated, because they don't think like that. They're thinking, oh, my team just got this guy. Trades happen. And GMs do an amazing job of selling it, saying, look, it's a business. Guys know what they're getting themselves into. They signed up for this. So fans don't really think about the implications and what this means for DeMar and his family and all that kind of stuff. But, when you peel back the layers and you hear, the talk's been happening for 2 weeks and DeMar just, was told he wasn't going to be moved, and you kind of switch the roles a little bit and think about what it would be like if the player did this and flip-flopped. We already saw the DeAndre Jordan mess. I mean, that's, closest in my mind, in terms of an equivalent. I mean, it's just one of those things that frustrates me, and players right now are definitely feeling for DeMar and pointing to this as an example of why they shouldn't be vilified when they make a free agency move. Let's look at the Spurs now, because they brought in, Jakob Poeltl, who will be 23 years old when the season starts, DeMar DeRozan, who's 29 years old next month. As we mentioned, they have the late first-round pick or 2 second-round picks, depending on, if they get that pick in 2019. Do you think this is the best move they could get? Should they have really went for the win-now approach? When we first did our Kawhi Leonard podcast, whenever he demanded a trade, we had a reactionary podcast that night, and we said, they should go after young players and as many draft picks as they can get, completely rebuild, blow it up. But the Spurs, they kind of took a different approach. They re-signed Rudy Gay. They, seemed to make it clear that they wanted veterans that could continue to compete. DeMar DeRozan is a guy that's in his prime, obviously, and Poeltl, is 23. He's not the youngest guy. Do you think they should have went after younger players and draft picks, or is this a case where there really wasn't a deal like that out there because so few teams were willing to give up assets?
Well, I think we'll find out more about your last question in the next few weeks. I'm sure there's going to be a bunch of think pieces or reports from Woj and all these people talking about the kind of packages that the Spurs were receiving for Kawhi.
Right.
We read yesterday that the Celtics basically weren't trading any of their 5 best players for him, which is hilarious because there was no chance they were going to sign him or be able to trade for him by not giving up a Jaylen Brown or a Jason Tatum or whoever. And we also saw that the Sixers weren't offering any of their 3 best players, all of whom are really young, Embiid, Simmons, and Fultz. So, I mean, it's easy to say, oh, they should have held out for more picks or they should have tried to deal for more young players, but we just don't know. And from the scuttle, it looks like that they weren't receiving many offers containing high draft picks or young players. When we first did that pod, first of all, the Raptors came totally out of left field because they weren't even among the 6 teams that were originally bandied about as potential suitors for Kawhi.
Yeah.
And when part of the article was that I wrote down like a few assets that they could get in return, and most of them were high draft picks. But again, we don't know if they were actually receiving offers for that. It looks like most teams weren't willing to take on the 1-year rental potential that it looks like it's going to be for the Raptors. Well, the Raptors decided screw it. I mean, to be honest, I sort of do like the package for the Spurs. I mean, it's not the best they could have done by any means. I mean, they obviously could have done better by landing younger assets or actual draft picks or whatever. But at the same time, Pop, who knows how many years he has left. I think the latest rumor was that he was going to retire after 2020. So why not be as good as possible right now? The Spurs aren't an organization known for like that. They're just not the type of team that tanks, They did it once, like 20 years ago for Tim Duncan, which people love to bring up, but that was over 20 years ago. Pop was in a different part of his life. Now he's in the twilight of his career. Maybe he wants to coach a playoff team for the next 2 years with guys that are going to buy into the team, who have a good team first attitude, who are going to help them win at least 45 to 50, maybe even 55 games a year. I mean, DeRozan might have his flaws, but he's coming off his best year according to box plus minus, according to win shares, I believe, and according to value of a replacement player. So, yeah, he's 29, but his game should age well because he's not super, super reliant on athleticism. He's more so reliant on his snaky, tricky little moves in the paint, his follow-away jumpers. Maybe working with Chip England on the Spurs staff will help him develop even more of a three-pointer, which would be huge. Last year, the Spurs were a really good team. They won 47 games, even without Kawhi Leonard. And that was without any sort of perimeter scoring. It was LaMarcus Aldridge having to carry them with the scoring every single night. So maybe the addition of a gunner like DeMar DeRozan, who was a pretty efficient scorer last season, will help them win even more. I think it's without question they're going to be better next year than they were this year. They did lose some defensive pieces like Kyle Anderson, but they re-signed Rudy Gay, who was pretty good last year. Marco Bellinelli was great for the Sixers. I didn't love the value of his deal. It was a little bit expensive for an older player, but still, he's a great shooter. You're landing DeMar DeRozan. Poeltl should be pretty good off the bench for them. I think it was the right move just because we don't know if anyone was offering them young assets, and it doesn't look like they were. So it's honestly starting to look like this is the best they could have done, especially if they were so resigned to not trading him to the Lakers. And plus, I don't think the Lakers were offering them anything, a package even close to resembling the Raptors, the package that came from the Raptors. So I think it was the right move, and I think they're going to be a pretty good team next year.
Yeah, and once Kawhi, once LeBron James went to the Lakers, it seemed like they just said, okay, we're not going to give up these young pieces for Kawhi. We feel like we can get him in a year in free agency, so why gut our team and make some big offer that makes us lose Brandon Ingram, Kyle Kuzma, you name it, for Kawhi. I think that's their approach. So the Lakers were kind of out. As you mentioned,
though I do get it for the Lakers why they wouldn't want to give up any of their young elite players because those guys look like they're going to blossom into excellent players. At the same time, they just went through this with Paul George where they were so sure they were going to sign him this summer, and then the summer arrived and he didn't even take a meeting with the Lakers. So I don't know. Maybe the Lakers should have ponied up a little bit and tried to offer a few more of their assets. But Magic Johnson obviously knows what he's doing than I do, so it is what it is, I guess.
Well, yeah. I see what you're saying. I totally I agree. I would have made an offer. I wouldn't have, made a huge offer like Ingram and Kuzma and all these guys. But I think if they were making an offer that was, if they were just offering a smaller type of package, then obviously I think the Spurs would have said no and dealt with, the Raptors or another team. So that's where, if you're not going to give up Ingram and Kuzma, then I don't think you can really find a deal there between the Lakers and the Spurs. And the Spurs also, they didn't want to help the Lakers form the super team. They didn't really want to, reward Kawhi, after everything that happened over the last year and, how messy this got. They didn't want to reward Kawhi and send him to LA. If it, even, especially if it wasn't a great deal for them. The only way they would have done that is if there was some kind of amazing offer that was coming their way, and that obviously wasn't going to happen. So I agree with what you're saying. They probably didn't have many other options on the table, and I think you brought up a great point. I was about to say this too. Chip England is someone that should definitely be considered here, and for fans who don't really know who Chip is, he is the shooting coach that has done an amazing job with so many players and improved their three-point percentage. He fixes your shot, so he's helped a lot of guys with their stroke, Kawhi Leonard included. When Kawhi entered the NBA, his shot was supposed to be his biggest weakness. I remember going to his pre-draft workouts at Impact Basketball in Las Vegas, and he was already starting to show some improvement because he was working on it a lot. He was getting a lot of reps. He was working with Joe Abunassar, the trainers at Impact, so he was already starting to make some slight progress. But then he went to Chip England in San Antonio and completely turned around his shot and became a knockdown shooter, a great three-point shooter. And he's done that with a number of guys. He's helped plenty of guys improve their shot, and I think he could work wonders with DeMar DeRozan. DeMar is a guy who has already made huge strides when it comes to his three-point shooting. He went from shooting 25% from three as a rookie. During his sophomore season, he played 82 games. He shot 9.6% from a three-point range. And then
is that good?
No. and then you look at last year, he shot 31%. 2 years ago, shot 33.8%. So the guy has improved a lot. And last year, he made over 1 3 per game, which was the first time he did that in his career. So I think he's getting more comfortable shooting the ball. And I think Chip England can really help him, become more comfortable, have confidence in his shot, and maybe work on, some of those little issues that he has with his shot. So that could be huge here. If he's able to unlock DeRozan's shooting and make him, a 34 or 35% 3-point shooter, that is a huge move for the Spurs and makes this even more attractive. And DeMar's under contract for 3 more years, so it's not like they have 1 year to work with him. They can work with him over, a few years, and he's 28 years old. He's about to be 29, but he's still young enough to where they have a few more years of his prime left, and they can try to put other, talented players around DeMar. I like the core they have right now. I was throwing it out there wondering if they should have went after young pieces, but I think you're right. Greg Popovich, he's 69 years old. He is toward the end of his career. He doesn't want to go through a rebuild and coach a bunch of teenagers. I honestly think if they had blown this up and went after, just a bunch of draft picks and, a project player, he may have considered retirement and went in a different direction. I don't know that for a fact, but, that's a possibility. So by doing this, you move on from Kawhi. They still have a really good team, and we know that Pop gets the most out of everybody. So, what can he do with DeMar DeRozan? How can he develop Jakob Poeltl? And you look, their starting lineup is still, it's pretty good. I mean, DeJounte Murray, DeMar DeRozan, Rudy Gay, Pau Gasol, LaMarcus Aldridge, with Lonnie Walker, Patty Mills, Jakob Poeltl, Manu Ginobili off the bench. I mean, I think that's a team that is still going to be a playoff team in the Western Conference, as loaded as the West is. Honestly, I mean, I see why some Spurs fans are upset. Some people were wondering, why didn't they wait a little bit longer, wait till the trade deadline? But Woj reported that they didn't want to enter training camp with Kawhi. They felt like that would be too awkward and just not a good scenario for anyone. So they want to get this done now. And when, every team that they talk to, whether it's Boston or Philly or LA, isn't offering a great package, Portland wasn't offering CJ McCollum, apparently. I think they had limited options, but they found a good deal. Even though Kawhi is in the last year of his contract, is coming off a quad injury that a lot of people are kind of uncertain about. Considering everything that went into this, and considering the circumstances with Kawhi, I think they did a really good job here. This is one of those trades where you have two franchises that are known for kind of ripping other teams off and winning trades. When they deal together, it makes sense for both sides.
No, yeah, I totally agree with everything you said. I think it was a good deal for them. When they still had Kawhi Leonard, basically when they still had an elite perimeter scorer, even though DeMar is a mid-range guy, the Spurs of 2016-17, they attempted the third most mid-range jumpers of any team, which if you hear that now, it's kind of taboo to shoot mid-range jumpers, and people will think, oh, then I assume their offensive rating was mediocre at best or was probably bottom 10. They still finished the year 7th in offensive rating. So even if they're chucking up the mid-range jumpers, they still had a great offense a couple years ago. What they lacked last season, and the reason they finished 17th in offensive rating in 2017-18, was that they didn't have that perimeter guy they could just give the ball to get buckets. DeMar is going to fill that role. He's not going to do it as well as Kawhi did a couple years ago, because Kawhi, that was one of the better seasons we've had in recent NBA history. But he does fill the hole of a scorer on the wing. Tony Parker, I mean, much respect to him, a legend, but he looked pretty washed last season, if we're being totally honest. So replacing him with DeJounte Murray, who's blossoming and who looks like he's going to be a really good defender, and he's getting better with his touch around the basket and as a shooter. That's a really promising young point guard they have. Manu might retire. I hope he doesn't. One of my favorite players ever. I hope he sticks around for another year. But even if he does, they kind of hedge their bets by landing Marco Bellinelli. Like we talked about earlier, maybe I didn't love how expensive the deal was, but he's still a great shooter, which is what they need. So yeah, and Jakob Poeltl, I think, is a bit underrated. I think he only averaged like 7 points and 4 rebounds last season, but he was still part of the best bench unit in the NBA. He's a decent scorer around the basket. He's pretty athletic for a big Austrian guy, so I think people are maybe underrating his pickup a little bit. I think, considering the circumstances, this might have been probably the best the Spurs could have done, and I think they did pretty well for themselves, to be honest.
And as you mentioned, they're the Spurs, so a late first-round pick or even 2 second-round picks, they could find some kind of diamond in the rough with that pick. They have an amazing international scouting team. They do a great job analyzing prospects. They've been known for that. So that pick is more valuable to them than a team that, misses on their selections all the time. So that's worth noting too.
Even besides finding like diamonds in the rough, even besides that, they're also just so good at developing players. So they'll draft a Derek White or a DeJounte Murray who looks super raw around the edges, and they'll turn them into valuable contributors. So a mid-20s to an early 20s first-round pick for them is a lot more valuable than it would be for most other teams besides probably the Lakers, I would say.
Yeah, they give every guy a development plan. They really work on their body. They make sure they're ready for the league. They work on their weaknesses. That's why they have guys like Chip England there that are so good at, taking guys to the next level and polishing them, making sure they aren't so raw. And it's worked so many times. So that's why I'm excited to see, what they could do with Poeltl. I'm excited to see what they could do with Lonnie Walker, who is a guy that has so much potential. And, he really slipped on draft night, but I think he's a guy that, is a lottery talent, and could become a very special player. And when he landed there, I was excited for him because they're going to, get the most out of him and really be able to develop him. So the Spurs, obviously I think Spurs fans were hoping they were going to get, Brandon Ingram, Kyle Kuzma, a bunch of draft picks, or they were going to get Jaylen Brown and draft picks. I get that Spurs fans were dreaming about that and hoping that this Kawhi situation led to a move like that, but this is a good package for the Spurs. They're going to be a playoff team next year, in my estimation. I think that's the case. I'm never going to bet against Pop. And this roster is more talented than last year. Like you said, Murray has a year of experience under his belt. He's going to be even better with more experience. DeMar DeRozan, I think he's really going to help them a lot. Rudy Gay's going to be more comfortable, has some chemistry, knows the system and knows how to play for Pop a little bit more. This is still a talented team, so it'll be interesting to see what happens. One thing I think that, affected these talks too is the Golden State Warriors getting DeMarcus Cousins. And that may sound crazy, but teams didn't want to go swing for the fence and go for a rental when there's a team like the Warriors that seem like an absolute lock to win the championship. I think that's worth noting too, that, if this was a year where it was wide open and you had, 7 or 8 teams that felt like they had a legitimate chance to win the championship, you may have a team that was a contender that's willing to take a risk and bring in Kawhi as a rental. But in a year where the Warriors are such a lock and just so dominant on paper, I could see why teams are saying, we're not going to give up a bunch of assets for this 1-year rental of a guy that could leave in one season and who may not be 100% healthy, when our odds of winning a championship, even if we get him, are still very low compared to this juggernaut in Golden State.
Yeah, I actually hadn't even considered that point, but that is a fantastic point. The Lakers and LeBron James, since we know he's maybe not calling the shots, but he has a pretty big say in what they do. They probably realized that they didn't have a puncher's chance in hell to beat the Warriors this season, especially with the addition of DeMarcus Cousins. So they said maybe instead of trading our assets for Kawhi Leonard, let's keep the assets, which are still appreciating assets because Lonzo Ball should improve, Brandon Ingram should improve. So if you want to use them as trade chips next season, they're going to be even more valuable. So yeah, I think it made sense for them to just stay the course, keep their young guys, hope they get better, and then use their cap space to sign a Kawhi Leonard or a Jimmy Butler, or who knows? I mean, some of the scuttle from I heard this I believe on the Low Post on Zach Lowe's great podcast that maybe the Lakers are going to try and sway Kevin Durant and joining them in Los Angeles, which would be freaking hilarious. But yeah, I think it made sense for them to just wait out another year and just keep what they have.
Yeah, I think a lot of teams are taking that approach where they look at the Warriors and they say, okay, let's build for 2 or 3 years from now, and they're hoping that something breaks up this Warriors team, whether it's Klay Thompson leaving in free agency, Draymond Green leaving because there's been talk that he wants a supermax contract. Maybe Kevin Durant, all of a sudden says, okay, I did the whole Golden State thing. Now I want to, go to a different team or, have my own team again. Who knows? We don't really know what's gonna, lead to the end of this Warriors run, but I think the likeliest one is KD, right? Just because, it seems like he does get kind of upset by the vitriol he gets on social media and stuff, and it would honestly take just him leaving to another team for the vitriol to go away and for him to be
respected as an amazing NBA player. I mean, just look at how it was for LeBron. In 2014, when he was still with Miami, he was still one of the most hated players in the NBA. He went back to Cleveland, and immediately he was beloved again. So I think it would make sense for I could see their dynasty falling apart once Kevin Durant decides to go elsewhere.
And him leaving would have the biggest impact. All these players are great, obviously, but if Draymond Green leaves, for example, I think, they're still terrifying on paper. No disrespect to Draymond, but Steph Curry, Kevin Durant, those are the most important guys there. So KD leaving would be a huge blow to them. And then suddenly, that's when teams can say, okay, we actually have a shot now. Maybe we can win a championship or at least compete seriously. So I think, it's always tough to be in the Spurs situation and have a rental type star and trade it in a situation like this when they're such a dominant team like Golden State. But look, that's where, the Raptors, they jumped in and thought, okay, even if we can't win a championship this year, maybe we can go to the NBA Finals. Maybe we can, get past Boston or Philly in the East. So there is still some incentive there to compete and, improve the roster, even though most people think the Warriors are going to win it all this year. But that does definitely factor in, I think, to these trade negotiations and just how GMs are thinking right now. So, Frank, anything else to add on this? I mean, we kind of covered both sides here, what both teams are getting, what their outlook looks like. Anything else to add?
No, just follow me on Twitter so I can catch up to Alex's 160,000 followers. I'm lagging a little bit behind at 1,700. So if you could follow me at Frank Urbina _, that would be great.
Definitely follow Frank. He does a great job. He breaks down things really well, has tons of really interesting posts on HoopsHype, obviously, about, where guys could get traded, free agency destinations for certain players. And then really one of my favorite things that Frank does are, statistical, analytical breakdowns. And he does it in a way where even if you're not a big numbers guy, even if you, don't really follow advanced stats or things like that, he does it in a way that, makes it easy to understand, and you're going to become a smarter fan if you're following Frank on Twitter. So make sure you do that, at Frank Urbina _. He does a fantastic job. You probably see me retweeting him a ton. Make sure you go just follow him anyway. He does an amazing job over there. And for HoopsHype in general, we're going to have some more podcasts coming out in the next few days. We're going to try to do a Rumor Roundup podcast with a top NBA reporter breaking down some of the remaining free agents and some of the storylines that are still going on this offseason and in free agency. And then next week, Brian Kalbrowski and I are going to do a podcast breaking down players that could still be traded. Obviously, we have the Kawhi Leonard trade go down, but there are still plenty of players out there that are being made available in trade talk, guys that, there have been some rumblings about: Kemba Walker, Damian Lillard, Kevin Love, go down the list. There's plenty of players that we keep hearing trade rumors about. So we're going to break down all of those situations, all of those players, and see where they could end up and what that situation is like. Thank you guys for listening. And Frank, thank you so much for joining me, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was a lot of fun.
Well, if you guys want to listen to other episodes of the HoopsHype Podcast, be sure to subscribe to us on Audio Boom, iTunes, Stitcher, anywhere your favorite podcast can be found. And until next time, thanks for listening.